Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here and showing up. It's so great just after so many years of the pandemic. Big thank you to It's Nice That for just all the support for the last 10 years. It's so crazy to just religiously consume that blog when I was a student and to just be here right now. And I'm grateful to all of you who made time out of your Tuesday to attend here. But I think, for those who don't know me, I could start to introduce myself and just what I'm about. I think, primarily I'm a designer. I've had other kind of titles, art director, creative director. I don't really give a shit. It's mostly just very specific contexts, money. But I would say try and true, the title, the label, the identity that has, informed my work and what I do has just been designed because it's the primary domain of typography, which is, I think, my first love. Before I even learned how to read, I loved drawing logos, which is just what a fucking loser, but it was, this is just who I am, and you can't hate a goldfish for being wet. So, I do a lot of just I work with a lot of kind of cultural institutions, music, et cetera, and I've had that immense kind of privilege and also, I think, pressure in a way, but I also, as has been alluded, a huge fan and just obsessive about technology. I got my start creating websites, so coding and everything has just been this fundamental kind of dialogue and everything in my work. But I think mostly I would say I use what I've learned and my expertise on just pretty dumb shit at the same time. I think some of you might also be just familiar with the work where I started the design team at Essence and rebranded the company, and so that was one of the proudest kind of just projects I've done in my life. I've also worked at a Fortune 500 company as a cognitive machine, but also just really kind of memorable experiences. But I don't really want to talk about that. This is a new talk, so I'm a little bit kind of nervous. And there's not really that much work about it. It's just, I've had a weird kind of thought, and it's just been in my mind for the longest time. And I promise you that no blunts were hit in the making of this presentation, but I think recently I've just been thinking about this question. Are images created or are they discovered? And believe me, it sounds really obviously dumb or just not even a question at all, but it's something that the more I really try to fundamentally think about it with, I think the things that I've learned and what I know about the years, it became kind of a more ambiguous or more vague kind of answer space that I wasn't really sure what happened. And so I think I'd like to start off with that talk and just maybe kind of go into fundamentally what makes a digital image in particular. And for that, I think we have to start at the atomic level, the pixel, the singular, most irreducible unit on a computer screen. I think, thanks to the wonders of technology, there's definitely a lot more pixels on everyone's screen this year, unless you're, you want to be a cool guy or something for no reason. But I think, it's one of those things where I think we're very aware of, but we're really not at the same time. But I just want to take everybody on a little bit of an exercise. So how about we create a really tiny, cute little baby image really quick. So, we'll call this a tiny image. Let's make it 5 pixels by 5 pixels, and let's start. And so we have this, little small but very honorable canvas within which, think of this as a grid where a pixel is essentially light pointing at a screen, right? It's either off or it's on. And so with that, you could turn everything off. You could also turn everything on. You could turn some things off, and you could turn, some of them on too. And once in a while, you're going to get something where it's hey, that looks like something. That looks like a symbol that I know, or I could see a face in this. But I think, most of the time, just as you're just randomly going through the cycles, I would say the majority of the images that you're going to put forth are pretty random and maybe not have kind of meanings. But I think the simplicity of this is really interesting because with that off and on, 0, 1, you could kind of just map an image kind of numerically, and if you format a string and decode it in a certain way, you could get that image again too. But I would say that because it's a 5 by 5, it's like tic-tac-toe, there's kind of a set amount of images you can make because of just how small it is, right? It's not infinite. There's only, it's just spinning a random number and random distributions. There is a finite amount, right? And so I did the math, and it's about 33 million images. It's a lot. It feels like infinity, but it's not infinity. And then when you talk about color, it gets a little bit more complicated, right? So we go back to the pixel, and when we talk about color, there's a pixel is comprised of 3 lights that shine in red, green, and blue, and in most of our like computers in our color spaces, we number them like 0 to 255. And with those numbers, we're able to just represent 17 million colors, right? And human beings, we could see mostly a million, and so most of those colors we can't even perceive. So effectively, within these like 3 color combinations, we could see most of the things that a human being can see. And again, a lot of it's going to be random if you just kind of just number it numerically. Once in a while, you'll get something where it's like, hey, it's still a tiny image. I'm not completely sure what it is, but it might be a sun in a blue field, or it might be a UCLA jersey, but not sure. But again, it's still kind of just, if you're just doing a bunch of just random images on a 5x5 grid, a lot of it's just going to kind of look pretty random. But even as there's more complexity to it, it is still a finite amount. It's a much bigger amount, maybe something that it's like really hard to kind of fathom. But again, it's not infinite, right? And so I think when you're talking about an image, like conceptually, it may feel like infinity, but the moment you start putting parameters on it, you give it dimensions, you give it a size, it's a big ass number, but it's not forever, right? And so, again, it's like our images kind of created or discovered. You kind of get into this kind of weird philosophy space where, definitely not the only person who have thought of this. There's a lot of analogies over history, like the infinite monkey room. And what that is that if you get a room with an infinite amount of monkeys, all typing, it's going to be gibberish for most of the time, right? But in an infinite amount of time, you're going to randomly get a work of Shakespeare one moment, and it's like, especially if you limit it to like a specific word count and whatnot too. And I think also just, again, how we're able to represent certain images like numerically, you can kind of just phrase it in a different question, like, is math created or discovered? We're not creating numbers out of thin air. It's like we got to the highest number, we got to create a new one. It's, those numbers exist, in our universe. It's just we haven't really labeled it, right? And so I think, numbers, of course, kind of form this big component in code. And I know this is a room full of graphic designers, illustrators, artists, and stuff, so I apologize, but, just please bear with me for a second. Let's just look at a very simple line, and pretend, if this helps, just pretend it's geometry. Never mind, just forget it. Don't bring back math class, I'm sorry. Let x equal 0. It's a very straightforward thing. It's like you're assigning the value of 0 to a constant that you call x, right? And so you're not creating the number 0 from x. You can almost think of it in a way where there's this programmer, Dan Abramoff, he broke it down to me in a really beautiful way where it's like, if you think of your constant, as like you yourself in a world, and you think, in this world, you're surrounded by an infinite space of stars. Imagine there's, an infinite amount of stars in the sky, and they all correspond to a number, You might get like 0, you might get like a huge number, you might get like a triple digit number. But what you're doing essentially is that you're pointing at a star, and you're saying like, that's what x is pointing to. And when we assign a different value, you just, cut that string loose, and you point it to another star. It's like, what's the point of that, right? In programming, it's pretty profound because it deals with a lot of like, you're not really creating new resources, you're reusing and relabeling. But again, what does this have to do with just like a random assortment of pixels, right? Like, none of us really make images that small. And so maybe there needs to be a more kind of practical example where, I think about noise a lot, like a noisy image. Like just everyone that's ever tried to take an iPhone photo in the dark knows what I'm talking about. There's just kind of just specks everywhere, just like randomly colored dots, right? And even this one, it's okay. But then let's look at like a really noisy image. Let's see what's going on, right? If you try to, ask a computer what this is, it probably can't tell you because at the atomic level, it's just a random assortment of pixels. But what's crazy about you and I is that as a human being, it's kind of easy to see what's going on. It's, 2 people and a bunch of balloons. But it's wild. It's like when you zoom in, it's really just a random assortment of grids. But as human beings, like we're so gifted at pattern recognition that we're able to see something. Just like we look at clouds and we could see animals or constellations in the sky and think of like Greek heroes, we're able to find that signal in that sea of noise, right? And, eliminating noise has been just this really hard problem. Like anyone that's tried to, make noise go away in Photoshop, I think they know what I'm talking about, where the image kind of just looks kind of deep fried and it's like not really sure like what's better and what's not. And, because I think mathematically, if you try to do it through code, it's like, okay, let's take an average of this area and let's locate like the 1 pixel that stands out. That's not really how it works, right? Like at some point, if we could tell a computer like those are two people, it might make better sense of like what color belongs where and what color doesn't belong in an image. And that's what researchers and NVIDIA tried to do, I think 10 years ago. It's like, hey, we can maybe train an AI kind of data set in like just like computer vision and deep learning, and we could kind of reinforce what things are, and it could denoise things in a better way too. And so what they really tried to do was like they gave it an image and they labeled it. This is a cat. And then they're like, let's put some noise on it. And because it's a cat, it's able to denoise it pretty effectively. And that's pretty good. So they added even more noise onto it. It's like, can you see a cat from that? And it's like, you and I could still see that cat. And training this over years and years and just millions and millions of kind of iterations, they're able to denoise that, right? And so then came the ultimate challenge where it's like, can you see something? And this is, I think, the limits of our understanding, right? Where it's like, I don't see shit in there, and I don't think most of us will. But we tell it this is a cat, and it's like, wait a minute. Because of all of that iterative practice, like kind of training over all these years, it's able to do so. And then, by 2018, like the researchers at NVIDIA were just like, really joyous. It's like, it's gotten really good. But then, this subheadline had something that felt really ominous, where it's like, low light photography, magnetic resonance imagery, and physically based synthesis. What the fuck does that mean, right? So here's the thing, right? A computer doesn't know what to really do with this until you tell it this is a cat. And then one guy, one person, I don't want to assume the gender, but like one person or maybe a few people, I don't really know the entire backstory, they're like, what if we lied to it? What if we told it it's a dog? And this simple, very straightforward AI thing to remove a very specific task, the use case suddenly became much more infinite, because once you tell it it was a dog, you get essentially like hallucination, and it's, it just needs a little bit of nudge, and it's able to kind of complete the rest. And, when I look at those noisy images, in many ways I just kind of think back to those like random assortment of pixels, I think when you're working with AI, whether you're in Mid-Journey or, whatever, Stable Diffusion or whatever software, the process, you're entering this thing called latent space. And again, it's like this infinite hallway of like every possible image. We give it a prompt and it gives it a random number. And from that random long 18-digit number, it's able to generate like a noisy, tiny little 32 by 32 image. And from there, it's getting our prompts, treating it as a little bit of a nudge, and evolving it, right? And so I think a lot of people engage with AI, but it's like, there's definitely like legitimate questions of plagiarism, like consent, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's like when you really try to understand the platform, it's not necessarily that different from how you and I may be taking our experiences. It's like we're trained on a bunch of different kind of images, and we're making meaning out of them. We're assigning labels to them in our head. And when we create work, we're going through that infinite space in our head, and we're almost trying to grab something out of the ether. And so, in a way, it's like if you're talking about a digital image, like a 32 by 32 image, or even like a 500 by 500 image, pixels that is, in a way it's like those images, it's just probability at a point. In a way, conceptually, they already exist, and in a way we're kind of just pulling them out of this ether in a way, right? But then if images might perhaps be discovered, is art discovered? Absolutely not. It's like, and don't believe anybody that tries to attempt to tell you this. This is something that I think you and I all know too, right? And I hope that I wasn't really leading you on in that direction, because it's just, I think everyone here that has created an image or created an illustration or done something, we know in our hearts, like that is such an oversimplification of that question. I think even when we talk about net art and stuff, it's not really something in the computer. Like the art happens because of this context. A monkey could land on Shakespeare, but it's still not fucking Shakespeare, because Shakespeare works came out in a very specific time. Shakespeare was a very specific person with a very specific history. What this has is context, right? And human beings are the ones that provide that context, and context is this important building block of art. And so this thing that I said that was random in the beginning, I could give it meaning too. I think it's a cool dude enjoying a tasty sub, and now I kind of see it, right? And the point is that like everything is random until it isn't. These aren't random numbers. That's like the New York area code, my hometown area code, like my zip code, and Mike Jones's phone number, my birthday. And it's like the fact is, like, even when you give us nothing but numbers, like just neutral numbers, we come up with meaning ourselves. Like we literally have lucky numbers, right? And so the thing about AI thing is just like, yeah, I've experimented, I've dabbled, I've been genuinely impressed. Like what I try to do is like, I really try to just break it as much as possible. Like I'm not really trying to imitate something. I'm trying to just get it to make ugly stuff and just being amused by it. I think once in a while I've tried to make like more impressive things like making type do this. But I think the funny thing with like, it's like filters. It's like the moment it's like mainstream, it's kind of boring already. And so, you know, the reason I think I wanted to talk about this, and I know I'm going a little bit over time, so I'll be a little bit mindful, but, you know, it's been kind of a tough year, I think, for me and a lot of my colleagues. Like, we're, I think, all a little bit embarrassed to kind of admit it, but for some reason, like, the scopes are twice as big and the money is like half as much, you know, at the very least. And it feels like, you know, in this like kind of weird economic downturn that like these new tools that you see like weird, you know, Twitter bros who they themselves couldn't even pass the Turing test, like saying that this is like the end of our careers and whatnot. It, like all of that just like feels really weird, but at the same time, it's like people could keep squeezing, but I think, you know, we have the juice. And I think a lot of times there's this human tendency to try to describe the world in very simple, engineered, kind of mechanical terms. But the moment we think we like figured it out, you know, it's like the greatest like discoveries of the 20th century, you know, Einstein's law of like relativity, second law of thermodynamics, you know, all of these things are like, they talk about this like complex irreducibility, but in a weird way, what we discovered is that like these laws are derivable from the point of view of an observer. You know, it's like, in a weird way, it's like the more we try to describe the world with numbers and data points, we realize that like there has to be an observer to kind of make the math kind of lean up, right? And so the thing is that like with AI, it's like there's a lot of people that are very scared of it. There's a lot of people that are very dismissive. I feel like both things just kind of don't really kind of feel right. Like I'm not scared for art. In a way, I'm not really scared for artists, but I'm scared that the people that pay us are definitely going to try to do something kind of funky. And I think that's a little bit, I think, kind of different, right? But I think what I try to tell my friends is that like, I'm not going to try to uninvent the steam engine, but I think we could really put our efforts into making sure that the train stations serve everyone kind of equally. And that means like advocating for consent on data training, right? This is like the original sin of the internet. We made ourselves like better, you know, design has had a much more meteoric like reach and like cultural literacy in the last 10 years because of social media, but we've almost just given up all our materials for free to be used on training sets, right? But in a weird way, it's like I don't necessarily regret the connections that I made. Like this is all due to us, you know, feeding these like AI language models in a weird way. It's what also brings us here tonight too. And the fact that you're all, you know, taking time out of your Tuesday to come here, I don't think this is something that you could really kind of describe in a single sentence or in an overly kind of simplified way. And so what I'm thinking about myself is that like, you know, creator, maybe that word has just too much baggage. Like, you know, it's like they'll say like AI can never be creative. Maybe it will. That's not really, to me, like, it's an okay word, right? Like I'm not really like fighting it. I think I know what I do is special and I know what I do is unique. And maybe I have to think of it in a different way. That, you know, that if I think of myself as a planet and I think of all the images that I could have ever made in this infinite space, I feel in a way like an alchemist where I reach my hand out into just like that infinite sky, you know, and in that kind of sea of just randomness, I pulled out the images that, you know, I made for a reason, but then I assigned the meaning to them. And with that, I hope I could fucking do this for the rest of my fucking life, for as long as I can, and I hope the same for everyone too. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but thank you so much, and thank you for your time.